Hello and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast. Our guest today is Rob Kaplan, who is the founder and CEO of Circulate Capital. Throughout Plastic Free July 2020, we've been talking about the problem of plastic pollution and what are the solutions to this great ocean challenge. In this instance, Rob talks about the power of impact investment for good. Rob, who is based in Singapore, has established the Circulate Capital Ocean Fund, a $106 million fund designed to invest in innovative solutions to stem the tide of plastic pollution and encourage the circular economy. I'm sure, like me, you'll find this conversation with Rob really enlightening and really eye-opening. I hope, as always, you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please talk about us, like it, and share it around. Thanks for tuning in. Hello and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast, where our guest today is Rob Kaplan, who is the founder and CEO of Circulate Capital, which he established to help deploy catalytic capital in partnership with leading corporations and investors to scale solutions that advance the circular economy and prevent the flow of plastic waste into the ocean in South and Southeast Asia. Very important. Rob leads the team at Circulate Capital as the firm identifies, incubates, and invests in opportunities diverting waste from the environment into the recycling chain in South and Southeast Asian countries. Thank you so much for joining us, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Tim. It's great to be here.
Now, I always like to start our conversations on the podcast at the beginning, which is about you and your passion for the environment and maybe even a glimpse into your relationship with the ocean.
Yeah, well, as you can probably tell from my accent, I grew up in the United States. I spent most of my life there. I lived all over the country. I grew up in Massachusetts, outside of Boston, then lived in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, California, Louisville, Kentucky, Arkansas, New York, and now I'm based here in Singapore.
Wow, so that's quite a roundabout way of finding yourself living in Singapore in South Asia. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you're doing now and how that relates to your career leading up to this point in time.
Yeah, well, Circulate Capital is an investment management firm. We invest in companies, technologies, and projects that prevent plastic pollution. We have been around for a couple of years now, and the unique thing about our firm is that in our fund, which is called the Circulate Capital Ocean Fund, is that we've raised just over $100 million US from several large corporates. PepsiCo, who was our first investor, Coca Cola, Unilever, Chanel, Danone, Procter Gamble, Dow, CP Chem. And we're investing in those companies on their behalf to really help build their supply chains. And we were inspired by some research that came from the Ocean Conservancy that found that most of the plastic that gets into the ocean comes from just a handful of countries in South and Southeast Asia. And that if we invested in waste and recycling and the circular economy, we could cut that flow of plastic in half. So, this is where the work is, and that's why we're here.
Awesome. So tell us about how things are going to date since the fund was established and the first investments that you've been able to make.
So we officially opened for business about a year ago, and we've now made two investments, one in Indonesia, one in India. And we have about 6 others that are right behind it in various stages of due diligence. But for the most part, what we're investing in is startup and small, medium-sized enterprise waste and recycling companies in these high plastic leaking countries. We do consider ourselves full value chain investors. We'll look at anything that prevents plastic pollution, including innovative materials or innovative business models that are based on reuse or returnable, that reduce the need for single-use plastic in the first place. But in terms of things that are ready to scale today, most of our pipeline is focused on those waste and recycling companies.
Awesome. Now, we've seen so much action on plastic pollution in this past decade, and particularly in the last 3 to 4 years. What is it about your model with Circulate Capital that excites you and gives you the belief that we can tackle this problem by using this particular approach?
Yeah. Well, the unique thing about this space right now, and why I'm so attracted to this strategy, is sort of the difference between a lowercase s sustainable and uppercase s sustainable. What I mean by that is we can't achieve environmental sustainability without having business sustainability at the same time. And so we've taken this approach of looking at businesses that are investable and scalable, can generate an IRR for its investors. We think we have the potential to unlock much more capital. So we recognize that it's going to take much more than the $100 million we've been able to raise. It's going to take many billions of dollars. And the only way we'll get access to that scale of capital is if institutional investors, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, large-scale infrastructure funds, the folks that are financing the future of infrastructure across Asia, we need them to allocate capital to waste and recycling and the circular economy, just like they allocate capital today to things like bridges and ports and roads. But unfortunately, right now, they're kind of sitting on the sidelines. And the only way to get them engaged is if we start to show that IRR, which is why we set this up as that blended approach of both environmental impact and financial returns.
So you're able to launch the fund with the support of these large corporates. When do you forecast or foresee that those institutional investors may join in the pursuit of the fund and all the projects that you'll be supporting?
So we actually hold ourselves to a co-investment ratio. So for every dollar we deploy, we're looking to bring in another dollar from one of those institutional investors. And the challenge, the reality of it, is that many of the companies we're investing in today have never had outside capital. They've never worked with an institutional investor before. And we, Circulate Capital, are the first ones engaging with them in this way. A lot of the work we're doing is helping them prepare for those larger amounts of capital investment from true institutional investors. And that means, a lot of work, a lot of preparation, a lot of education. But what we're hoping to do is, by this first round of investments, start to get them ready for a larger round, right? And so while we're putting $2 to $10 million out there right now, and we're hoping to co-invest, what we're really planning for is not this 2 to 10, but in the next couple of years, help them raise 30 to 50 million to go to massive scale.
Great. So that would obviously mean then you're looking for very particular projects that do have that ability to scale. Maybe give us a bit of a rundown of what it looks like when you go into this landscape and you are seeking out these businesses to support. How many are at that level where they really could do with your support versus what else is out there to enable those that aren't quite ready yet to grow in a sustainable way to actually come to you when they are at that point in time?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I'd say maybe 10% of the companies, 15% of the companies we look at are getting to that stage and are ready for that kind of capital. And that means that 80 to 90% aren't. And it's something we recognize as a really big challenge. We have actually invested some of our own money, as well as that of our partners, and brought in some other funders to create something called the Incubation Network. That works with incubation programs across the region that are already existing, but aren't really working in this sector, and helping them build the ecosystem and build the field so that there can be an increase in that number of companies of that 80 to 90% that are getting ready for investment, and to accelerate that process.
Yeah, and that's exactly where people like Ocean Impact Organisation come in, and we're certainly already in talks with the Incubation Network about how we can assist from our part of the world down here in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your career leading up to establishing Circulate Capital, and what it is again that makes you really realise that this is the place that you, Rob, can be investing your time, energy, and passion in order to reach your ultimate career objectives.
Yeah. Well, I've actually, and we sort of skipped over this part earlier, but I've been working in the ocean and going to the ocean for most of my life. I grew up going to the beach every summer in Massachusetts, and didn't really appreciate it until it was gone. Once I moved to Kentucky and Arkansas, which are in the middle of America, both figuratively and physically. The absence of the sea and the ocean was pretty clear to me, and spent a lot of time trying to get back to it every year. I actually, started my career in the public policy space, working for ocean issues out of Washington, D.C. I helped launch an organization called Oceana. I did a lot of work in bycatch issues and raising awareness on fisheries and marine protected areas in the U.S. And got really interested over the course of that work on the disconnect between the private sector and the public interest. And it felt to me that even though there was an alignment in objectives, they were speaking different languages. And from my side, on the progressive side of politics in the US, our solution to engaging with the private sector was we should go out and hire a Republican consulting firm, because nobody in our team knew how to actually talk to business leaders. And so that's why I sort of got interested in this space and went back to business school with that idea of transitioning to the private sector. I spent about 10 years in large corporates. I was in the beverage industry in the US, and then I went to Walmart, where I led sustainability initiatives there, including some supply chain innovation and partnership and investment programs, as well as sustainable packaging globally. And this sort of connection between the causes that I believe in and making the case for that, not just from the policy side, but also on the private sector side, is really what had driven me throughout all of my career. And when the opportunity came about to do this work, I found myself in a unique situation where I understood how to harness the power of some of these corporations. I've been working with them. They were my peers, they were my suppliers for a number of years. And I felt like I was in a unique place to both engage with them and deliver a program that could meet their needs, but also make a tangible difference in plastic pollution in this region, which is, the absolute goal. And I felt like I was the only one who could do it. And that's why we launched Circulate Capital.
Great.
And so you've obviously moved my family around the world from New York to Singapore, much to my mother-in-law's chagrin.
Yeah, I was about to ask that question. This is obviously a huge personal and family commitment for you to move to the region in order for Circulate Capital to make its biggest impact. What has that been like to date? Obviously, the world is in a pretty crazy state right now in July 2020. What's it been like?
It's definitely surreal watching what's happening in the US and around the world from kind of the bubble of Singapore. In many ways, it's disconcerting to be so far away from family and friends who are dealing with sort of existential crisis for America right now. But at the same time, this is a good place for us to have with our family. And the adventure that we signed up for last year is a little bit different than the adventure that we're having. But that's true for everybody in the world right now. So we're trying to keep the right perspective on it.
Indeed. And so you mentioned that obviously the strategic location of Circulate Capital being in Singapore to service South and Southeast Asia. Tell us a little bit about why that is in the context of the problem that you're trying so desperately to address.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that, this is the region where most of the plastic gets into the ocean. And right now, I think there's, and this is out of date, so it's probably an underestimate, but 300 million tons of plastic in the ocean. It grows by about 8 million tons every year. That's the same as a garbage truck full of plastic backing up to the ocean and dumping every minute. So it's a pretty significant challenge. It affects marine ecosystems. It affects wildlife. The problem is urgent and pretty disgusting, to be honest. You don't have to watch too many of these videos to get really upset about it. The interesting thing about it is if we look at places like Australia or the US or Europe, we have had growth over a 100-year period to get to this point. And we had the opportunity over that slow period, a long amount of time, to be able to invest in our own waste and recycling infrastructure. And it's far from perfect, but we don't have the same kind of litter problem that much of the emerging markets where we work do. And it's a function of, rapid economic development in a very short, 5, 10, 15 years. And infrastructure investments in these sectors haven't had an opportunity to keep up. But there's a huge opportunity now in India, in Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand to leapfrog. They don't have to build waste and recycling infrastructure like we have in Australia that's really based on landfilling, right? Landfilling first. And we have the opportunity now to kind of go from landlines to cell phones in these markets to think about a circular economy. And, COVID has really shown us that investing in those local economies and supply chains are critical for the economic health and resilience of our communities. And I think we'll start to see more and more capital flowing in that direction over the coming years as we start to get out of this challenge that we're in.
You mentioned before that a lot of the interest from the commercial backers of the project are looking at supply chain, which would obviously allude to then the adoption of circularity into those supply chains. Where are we at now with that in terms of the appetite across the market for post-consumer recycled material in those supply chains? Do we see situations like COVID and an oil price that dropped through the floor as being a real barrier to progress in that area? What are you picking up?
Yeah, I think there's no question that COVID plus the oil pricing crisis has caused a shockwave through the recycling industry. This recycling industry has felt these kinds of shockwaves in the past. It's not unusual to have this type of boom and bust cycle. The reality right now is we're seeing a lot of recycling companies go out of business. There's a lot of pain in the industry. It's hard to make a profit doing it the same way you've been doing it. And the companies that are best in class, that have built really strong businesses and understand what their feedstock is and have strong relationships with both their suppliers and their customers, are able to weather the storm. And those are the types of companies we're investing in across the region. But it is a challenge. And as we sat down with our corporate partners, the ones who are looking to buy that recycled content, when COVID started ramping up, we said, this is your capital. What do you want us to do with it? And the feedback was resounding, keep going, double down on this strategy. COVID's slowing some things down in 2019, 2020. But we're going to be back on track in 2021. And we need these companies building and processing and recycling plastics so that we can meet our own targets. And so, it takes 12 to 18 months sometimes to get some of these recycling facilities online and up to scale. So we're still on the right path here.
You mentioned the 10 to 15% of businesses that you approach you as being sort of in that sweet spot, and 85 to 90 that aren't quite there yet. What is some advice and guidance that you might be willing to offer for those entrepreneurs and innovators that maybe are in that 85 to 90%? What can they be doing and working on to make sure they're getting to that sweet spot as quickly as possible?
Yeah. I think engaging with organizations such as yours and other ones that are helping provide resources and capacity building would be the first piece of advice I'd give, which is, don't do this alone. This is a topic that a lot of people care a lot about. And there's a lot of resources out there to take advantage of to help you get there. And then when you start thinking about raising capital, make sure you know why you're doing it and what you're giving up. And if you don't have to do it, don't. Sometimes entrepreneurs think the first thing they got to do is go raise a seed round. And what we found is some of the most exciting businesses are those that bootstrapped it first and focused on profitability and built businesses that are ready to scale because they have a business model that works rather than one that's just backed by venture capital and trying to figure it out as they go. And it just depends on the sector you're in and what types of returns you think you can generate for investors. But it's a complicated conversation and not one to take lightly.
So even just to drill down into that point a little bit further, maybe talk to those couple of companies that you have invested in 2020. And what was it about those particular businesses that just made them so ripe for your involvement?
So Treaty Oasis is an exciting recycling company in Indonesia. They're in Tangerang, just outside of Jakarta. And it's founded by two inspiring female entrepreneurs who one's more of a business consulting type person and the other is an engineer. And she literally engineered her first recycling line from scratch. These two women got together and said, we think we can make a difference in plastic pollution in our community. Let's do this. And they created a recycling business that is profitable today. They're buying plastic bottles from the informal sector, and they've built really strong relationships with those waste pickers and aggregators. And then they're cleaning and flaking that PET and selling it into mostly Europe, actually, for a profit. This is a company that, is just on the verge of becoming a really scalable model. And so what we found with them is a company that we can work with. It's a team we want to back. And we'll work together over the next year or two to come up with what that 10, 20, $30 million growth strategy looks like. And so we put in a small amount of capital today to help them get started. In India, we invested in a company called Lucro, which is outside of Mumbai. And this company is interesting in that they were a plastic products company. They're selling most of their plastic products into the automobile industry. And they kind of just started using recycled material as part of their own manufacturing process for efficiency's sake, like industrial scraps, cutting room floor scraps, things like that. And realized that they had a real technical expertise that they had built on using plastic film as a feedstock for their plastic products. And they were actually more limited by their ability to manufacture plastic products than they were on their ability to manufacture recycled pellets or granules. And so we've invested in them to scale up their recycling capacity so that they can procure more post-consumer plastic films, which, by the way, is a type of plastic that most people will leave behind. But this company, Lucro, said, well, nobody else wants it. Let's see if we can turn it into a profitable feedstock. And that we're now investing in them to help them scale that up so they can sell recycled granules to other plastic manufacturers across India.
Fantastic. Those two very clear and tangible examples that can allow people out there who are listening in, perhaps of that entrepreneurial mindset, getting a bit of a picture about what is appealing to Circulate Capital's Ocean Fund. Now, Rob, we've had plenty of interactions over the years at various international conferences. I think we first met in DC at the 2016 Our Ocean Conference. What are you finding as we now step into 2020 and beyond that's happening at that international level, the meeting of stakeholders to tackle this problem? How do you describe it now versus what you've seen over the last 5 or so years?
Yeah. Well, you kind of noted it earlier, the intensity or popularity of this topic of plastic pollution has just been exponentially increased over the last 5 years. When you and I first met, I think that might have been the first time that plastics had gotten on the main stage at the Our Ocean Conference. And now it's, a key part of it. And everybody's kind of gotten into the mix. So back in those days, there weren't a lot of folks working in the space. Now every major NGO, policymaker has some kind of position on plastic. And everyone's working on it, which is very exciting. It also means it's gotten more complicated, right? With more stakeholders having their own views. I think it's also gotten a little more political. One of the things that's exciting about plastic pollution from my perspective, in as much as it can be a positive thing, is that there's nobody really in favor of plastic pollution, right? If you look at other major environmental issues, you've always got sort of people for and against the solutions. In plastic, even the plastic companies don't want their product in the environment. And they've committed massive amounts of capital themselves and energy to trying to solve the problem in their own ways. So you've got this unique opportunity of alignment. It kind of reminds me of stories of where climate change was back in the 80s and 90s, when there was scientific consensus and nobody was really concerned about whether we should fight it or not. It was really a question of how. And since then, it's become politicized and much more challenging. So we're at a unique point here where I always encourage folks working in those dialogues to say, it's not about my solution versus your solution. What it needs to be about is, both and. How do we do all of it? Because we're not going to recycle our way out of this problem, and we're not going to reduce our way out of this problem. We need to find solutions that do all of them. And there's plenty of plastic pollution to go around. So, every little bit helps.
Absolutely. I mean, at certain times of the year, with this being Plastic Free July is a campaign that has grown in prominence a lot in recent years. It does open up this conversation about the different ends of the spectrum of the sort of argument against the problem, and many people having a radical and a fundamental view there. From your side, what do you think about the more radical activism that tries to really stop the problem, sort of by all means necessary type attitude?
Well, I'm a pragmatist. I've been plagued by this my whole life, right? It's why I got out of Washington, D.C. in the first place. I'm more about, where we can make progress today than what's the perfect solution for tomorrow. I've been working on this stuff for too long to, be just focused on the ideal and more focused on the pragmatic solutions. And that's where I see my role. But I, have great respect for activists who are committing and arguing for as extreme as possible solutions, because that makes room for the pragmatic solutions as well. Because you can't have one without the other. And so I think the trick is, there's a spectrum of activity, and you need folks working on every side of that spectrum.
Yeah, this is where I think, obviously, I'm a recent supporter of this business-driven approach. I think I was born quite a bit out of the more radical side of things, and really that was, I suppose, it felt like a necessary reaction to a problem that wasn't being spoken about. But with this incredible growth in the sector and the awareness, now comes this incredible opportunity, which in many ways you are spearheading, which is, well, if we're going to solve this problem, we are going to do this through business, through big business, and through shifting as much money as possible into the future that we want to see. And that's really what you're doing so well. So what does success look like for you? If you could foresee in 5 or 10 years' time, what do you see Circulate Capital having achieved, and yourself personally? Yeah.
Well, we have a pretty clear set of success factors, because the way we've structured this as an investment fund, it's a 10-year fund. That means we have to deploy all the capital within the first 5 years and generate an IRR within the next 5 years, over 10 years total. And so that's really our target, is to show that this is an investment model that can work in a sector that can drive those returns. And then, go out and raise more capital, right? Hopefully not wait 10 years to do it, do it a lot sooner than that. But, like I said, there's this gap. There's a missing middle between investors in this sector, where the large institutional capital is waiting on the sidelines. So success for me is catalyzing that capital and doing that at the micro level within our fund, but then at the macro level as we start to see more people getting in this sector alongside us.
Yeah, and that to me is a really exciting prospect to see in the next few years. More and larger funds emerge to attract the best brilliant innovators and minds out there to tackle these solutions head on. Anything today that you thought we wanted to talk about, Rob, that we haven't quite addressed yet? It's been a wonderful chat, but I want to hear any other thought bubbles that are coming to your mind.
No, it's been a great chat, Tim. It's good to see you. As we've been talking here, and I've just been reflecting a little bit on some of the themes we're talking about. And one that just really hits home to me is just the importance of collaboration, right? What your organization is doing, what our organization is doing, and everybody in between, on how do we really collaborate to create more investment opportunities, right? More entrepreneurs, more startups that can attract capital, and then folks who want to put that capital to work. So I would just encourage more collaboration, as much collaboration as possible. If folks want to find us, We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, we're at circulatecapital.com. I'm always interested to find new investment opportunities. If you think you've got a company that's looking for it, or folks who are looking to put capital to work and trying to engage with another investor who has some expertise in this space and is looking to bring others along, we welcome all of those types of conversations.
Thank you so much, Rob. We couldn't agree more that it's about collaboration and partnerships, because the problems are broad and significant, and it's going to take all of us working together to try and solve them. Thank you so much for your time, Rob, and keep up the fantastic work.
Thanks, Tim. Have a great afternoon.